We've been researching the megatrends that are going to be affecting not just the mining industry, but industries around the world. And we tend to think about 6 global megatrends. One we call the innovation imperative. And what's happening in the mining industry is that as we mine out deposits that we know about, we have to go progressively deeper. We're mining out the high-grade deposits, so we're getting less and less good quality deposits in the ground. And of course, we need to find new deposits because in order to meet the rising demand, rising population. And so innovation is a core challenge for the industry in order to be able to access complex, low-grade ores from deeper under the earth and to be able to find new ores in places that haven't yet been explored. So that's a key trend for us. But what we're also seeing is something that we call, if you like, a trend around the knowledge economy. And this is about the fact that, increasingly we are able to, we're seeing knowledge and ideas moving around the world, which is changing the way that we structure our industries. So a challenge there is going to be how the industry responds to managing this incredible amount of knowledge that it generates through exploration, mining and processing. And that will lead on to whole new industries around database management, modelling, digital exploration, and a separate trend that we often identify, which we call plugged in and switched on. And this is the trend around automation, which is a trend that the mining industry, of course, is embracing. In many ways, the mining industry is a real leader in innovation and automation. It means that the industry can go to remote places, it can go to hazardous places, and it can use robotics in order to remove people from hazardous places. But it introduces a whole range of challenges around what does that mean for jobs? What does that mean for how you fix a problem when it happens? A whole different way of operating a site. A site becomes a big robot, if you like. Obviously, if you're changing the way that jobs are created through the resource sector, you're actually having an impact on people and what they can expect from the industry. So another trend that we have identified in our work we call the era of sustainability, and this is a trend where some of the things that have perhaps been taken for granted by the industry for a long time can no longer be taken for granted. The expectation that an operation will deliver social value, both back to the community that it is kind of hosting the operation and also back to the broader national good. The expectation that the environment will be looked after, an expectation around transparency, that whatever the mine site is doing, whatever the miner is doing, is transparent and open. The challenges in this trend is that it's kind of forcing the industry to move things that have traditionally been managed as a cost, or we've got to repair the environment, or we need to make some community investment. So, but it's essentially asking the industry to move it from that cost side of the ledger to the investment side. Oh, you need to invest in your community and in the environment and in building great relationships, because if you don't, the value of your operation will significantly will be affected. And then we have a trend which is perhaps a bit further out there for many people, which we call rethinking our reserves. And this is the idea that actually the way the industry operates at the moment, quite a lot of valuable stuff is left on waste heaps, in tailings dams. A lot of inherent mineral value is never taken off the mine site. And so you're leaving a lot of the resource on the mine site. At the same time, as we become a bit of a, as we use materials and throw them away, the concept of recycling and reduction and reuse is coming into the fray. And what I think the industry hasn't yet done, or we as a global society haven't yet done, is really look at, if you were to take all those resources into account, including stuff that already exists in manufactured goods, stuff that exists in waste, it's going to change the picture of what is needed to actually extract mineral values time and time after time. So 6 trends that we identify, each representing different level of challenge for the industry. Quite an exciting time, obviously. But longer term, I think there are some really interesting structural changes that may happen because of these trends. Rethinking our reserves challenges the business models of some of the existing major miners, because will Rio become a recycling company? Very possibly not, and that's where I think we'll start to see some quite exciting new and innovative companies emerging who can, for example, extract value from waste dumps, help to manage your tailings dams, or even turn recycling into a really, really productive commodity generating business. So I think we'll see a number of changes there, where some smaller companies will start to emerge, built off new business models, enabled by digital technologies, with a very different concept of how they generate value for their business. Again, all of these things will require efficient businesses to run them and enable them. And I think a lot of those will be outsourced. So I think we'll probably see a far greater level of outsourcing of activity in the mining industry to companies that are not part of your normal contract miner, Caterpillar, Komatsu. So I think it'll be an exciting time, but I think the changes will be slow and gradual, because at the moment the industry is so dominated by some very major players. In my view, in the minerals business, everything is context specific. I mean, one of the truly unique things about minerals business is that your resources are in the ground at a certain location, which means they are fixed in space, and that location has a certain geology, it has a certain cultural history, it has a certain level of community around it, and all of these things combine to create quite a unique context. So these things will, I think, vary across space and time, but that variation will be modified because, as we've said before, the minerals industry is a very global business. It's dominated by one or two major players who work in a number of different commodities and who work in a number of different regions. And the effect of that is that as they roll out new practices, new innovations, new ways of doing things, they roll them out across the company and then tailor them for the local operation. So, for example, as somebody goes in to create a new mine, they have an opportunity to introduce the latest technology, whereas the mine down the road may have been operating for about 15 years already, and it has 15 years old technology, which has been, if you like, has been improved over the time. So you have different levels of innovation depending on when the mine's opened, where the mine is, who the miner is. You also have different cultural and societal expectations based on whether you're in a developing country, a developed country, a country with a history of mining. And so each mine has its own type, I suppose. And these trends are exactly what I said, they're trends. They're things that broadly, if you look at all the differences from one place to another, everything is going in that direction, but there will be differences between regions, definitely. Commodities probably less so. I mean, the innovation required to develop a bauxite deposit compared to developing a new porphyry copper deposit is different. But all the issues about and expectations of transparency and accountability, productivity, return to shareholders are relatively blind to the actual commodity that's being taken out of the ground. So I think the variations will be more on a regional basis, and they'll be defined a lot by the kind of level of economic development that different locations are at. So the question about whether incremental change in technology and innovation can be sufficient to meet the trends that we're talking about is one. There's a lot of debate about it out there at the moment, and one of the questions that we haven't really solved is the definition of incremental change. You can get quite transformational by grouping together a number of incremental innovations. And certainly what we've seen over the last 10, 20 years are amazing differences in productivity because of subtle changes in the way we mine. Is the automation of trucks an incremental change? You're still using trucks to move big piles of dirt around, but they don't have people in them. Is that incremental or is it transformational? It's really quite transformational from the point of view of how the mine works, how many people it has, the jobs it offers, but it hasn't actually changed the process of mining particularly. What's now being considered a lot is whether actually we can go back to the concept of much more selective mining. So we leave low-grade material in the ground. We only take out of the ground the minerals that we're interested in. At the moment, we have big trucks because it is more productive to take a whole heap of dirt out of the ground and sort it and process it in the processing plant. And then you end up with a valuable stream of minerals and huge amounts of waste rock. So one of the transformational things that's being considered at the moment is the idea of selective mining, where you don't take the waste stuff out of the ground at all, you sort of process it in situ. I think that is probably one of the biggest transformational changes that we can look at, and that certainly would address simultaneously a number of the trends and a number of the challenges that the industry is experiencing because of those trends. I think the issue of how the resources sector relates to its stakeholders is probably one of the most important issues that we need to get our heads around. Traditionally, a really important stakeholder group is obviously the shareholders, and traditionally the mining sector has really paid attention to their duty to their shareholders, to the people who invest in the company in the first place. But now, increasingly, we're seeing concern about the social acceptance in the resources sector, and it's consistently now one of the top 5 risks that the corporate suite will talk about for the resources sector. We're also seeing that where social conflict begins to arise around the resources sector, you see that the market starts to discount the share value of the company. And of course, in a number of occasions now around the world, we see situations where social conflict has resulted in operations not being approved, being halted, being delayed. So it's a very, very significant issue for the resources sector. I think there has been a tendency in the past to tackle this issue as a risk. How do we manage this risk? And there has been language used and developed around social conflict, which is about, which sets up, if you like, quite a contentious relationship between a resource company and stakeholders who perhaps are not seen to be supportive of the resource company. And what that has perhaps ignored is the opportunity to create positive relationships between a resource operation and the majority of stakeholders, who are often that they get that the world needs resources and therefore we need to have resource operations, but they also have a reasonable expectation that they want to see that a resource operation is not just taking stuff out of the ground for the benefit of the shareholders, but it's also delivering value back to the communities and the society which kind of hosts the resource, and the environment which has nurtured it over long geological eons. And I think if we can start to focus on how do you create the positive relationship, the positive legacy from resource development, for me, that is the way of addressing this global trend around expectations of sustainability. As long as if we were to concentrate just on the negative relationship between stakeholders who perhaps have quite a strong vested interest in a very different direction to the resource company, we're going to continue to be in a situation of conflict, which is obviously much more difficult to resolve.